Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Dana Haggard, Professor of Management and curator of this video on supportive communication. I hope that you find the information I've collected to be useful and interesting. Let's get started. Before we discuss supportive communication, let's establish what communication is. According to dictionary.com, communication is the imparting or the interchange of thoughts, opinions, or information by speech, writing, or signs. That's a fairly straightforward and concise definition. Communication Theory and Business Dictionary.com both have slightly longer and more detailed definitions. Communication theory defines communications as giving, receiving, or exchanging ideas, information, signals, or messages through appropriate media, enabling individuals or groups to persuade, to seek information, to give information, or to express emotion. Notice in this definition that how the message is conveyed, the media, has been added, as has the idea of the purpose of the communication, to persuade, seek, or give information, or to express emotion. The final definition I have listed here is from businessdictionary.com. To them, communication is a two-way process of reaching mutual understanding in which participants not only exchange, meaning encode and decode, information, news, ideas, and feelings, but also create and share meaning. I like this definition because it explicitly incorporates the idea that communication is a two-way process and that the parties involved create and share meaning. Communication hasn't truly taken place until the receiver understands the message the sender was trying to get across. A considerable amount of work on communication focuses on the accuracy of the message, the method of delivery, or dealing with noise. In other words, things that prevent the message from being properly encoded or decoded. As we move on to the idea of supportive communication, you'll see how the focus increases on the way the message is delivered, because it not only matters what is being said, but how it is being said. So here are three definitions of supportive communication. The first two are from Wetton and Cameron, and they define supportive communication as communication that helps managers share information accurately and honestly without jeopardizing interpersonal relationships. They expand on this in the second definition, and that they describe supportive communication as seeking to preserve or enhance a positive relationship between you and another person while still addressing a problem, giving negative feedback, or tackling a difficult issue. Notice in the first definition, the context is the workplace, but that in the second, they enlarge the context by simply stating that the relationship is a positive one. Managers often have to tell their employees things that the employees might not like. The same can be said for professors and students. Few people actually enjoy being corrected or having their performance negatively evaluated. Whenever I must provide negative feedback, I try to remember the lessons from this lecture. Sometimes that's easier than others. The last definition has quite a bit of overlap with the second. However, it introduces the idea that the communication is intended to resolve a conflict or achieve change while potentially strengthening the relationship. We talked about the sources of stress in a previous video, and a big one was encounter stress, or the stress that comes with interpersonal relationships. This lecture will provide additional tools for students to use when dealing with this type of stress. We have looked in some detail into what communication, and specifically supportive communication, is. Now let's talk about why supportive communication is important. First, supportive communication minimizes defensiveness and disconfirmation. Defensiveness is when a person gets emotional because they feel they have been attacked. This reaction focuses them on defending themselves rather than on proactively dealing with the issue at hand, and it makes it more difficult for them to listen and understand the message. Disconfirmation is similar, but it has to do with a person's feeling of self-worth. When disconfirmation occurs, people feel that they are unimportant or insignificant. This reaction causes the person to focus on trying to establish their worth rather than on listening and understanding the message. Both of these reactions make it more difficult for communication to take place and can be damaging to interpersonal relationships. Managers get things done through other people, and in order to be effective, managers must be able to successfully communicate the negative as well as the positive, and to do so without damaging the relationship. Often, how something is said can be more important than what is said. Think of the last time that someone provided you with negative feedback. What really hit you the hardest? The content of the criticism or the way the criticism was delivered? Managers often have to implement change, and many people dislike change because they are more comfortable with what is familiar. In order for managers to be effective, they must not only convey the details of the change, but maintain a good relationship with their employees, because those employees will be key to the manager and the company's success. Managers must provide correction and negative feedback in order to assist employees in improving their performance. Managers also often have to deal with conflicts among as well as with their employees, and utilizing supportive communication can be extremely helpful in resolving conflicts. Here are some resources for you to measure your supportive communication skills. The first link takes you to a copy of the 8th edition of the Wetton and Cameron textbook, and it contains not only measures for supportive communication, but also many of the other concepts we have talked about in this class. I have also included a link to a communication assessment guide put together by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And as always, you can ask for feedback from those you interact with about their perception of your ability to provide negative feedback in a manner that helps to build the relationship rather than to strain it. Now let's move on to the specific characteristics that contribute to communication being classified as being supportive. The first characteristic is that the communication needs to be congruent. That means that your external signs or signals, both verbal and nonverbal, need to match your real thoughts and feelings. Congruency shows you're being sincere and truthful. Have you ever had someone say one thing, but their facial expression, tone of voice, and body language don't seem to match? It's hard to process what they really mean if they are sending mixed signals. Next, the communication needs to be descriptive, not evaluative. When you are describing the issue, you should be objective in the words you choose. State the facts as they are without passing judgment. In other words, leave out loaded language. Loaded language is when the word choice has a particular connotation that evokes a specific emotional reaction. For example, compare these two sentences. Susie stated that she is working as fast as she can. Susie claims that she is working as fast as she can. The use of the word claims carries the connotation that Susie only says she's working hard and implies she is being less than truthful. The third characteristic is to keep communication focused on the problem and not on the person. Focus on the behavioral solutions to the problem rather than talking about traits of the person. For example, if someone is consistently late to work, talk about how their lateness affects other people and the business. Do not tell them that their laziness is affecting their work. Keeping things focused on behaviors emphasizes the person has the ability to change the behavior and minimizes the problems that can arise when the person feels they are being attacked for who they are as an individual. Last for this slide is that supportive communication is validating. This means that the person feels as if they have been recognized, understood, and valued as a human being. In order to do that, it is important to pay attention to the person as they are communicating with you and agreeing with what you can. You aren't expected to agree with everything they say, but giving them the opportunity to say it and agreeing with what you can agree with will go a long way in helping the person feel validated. Use specific language and useful phrasing when communicating. Being specific means that you are describing the issue in enough detail that the message is actionable. The person can see exactly why you have reached the conclusion that a problem exists because you have given specific examples of a pattern of behavior rather than a general statement about your conclusion. Avoid global statements with extremes and absolutes, like always and never. A conjunctive message is one that is related to the previous message. In other words, be consistent and follow a logical progression. One message should flow to the next, and the receiver should be able to easily follow how they connect with one another. Owned communication is communication in which the speaker takes responsibility for the statement. In other words, owned communication involves I statements rather than they statements. If you think the issue is a problem, then the person should know you are the one who came to that conclusion, and you are the person they need to satisfy with the change in their behavior. Using they and we makes the person question who the message is coming from, and they will spend time unproductively trying to figure out who they and we are. Giving negative or corrective feedback is uncomfortable, and it is natural to want to try to minimize potential anger on the part of the receiver by trying to deflect responsibility by shifting the blame to someone else. But it is unhelpful to the receiver and disingenuous. The last characteristic here is that supportive communication involves supportive listening and response. As one of the earlier definitions explicitly stated, and the others implied, communication involves at least two parties, and it is an exchange or the creation of shared meaning. In order to do that, communication not only involves sending the message, but getting feedback from the receiver. Listening supportively involves active listening, making eye contact, and focusing on what the other person is saying. There are at least 4 types of responses in supportive listening. The first is advising. An advising response provides direction, opinion, or instructions. A deflecting response shifts the focus from what the speaker is wanting to focus on to what the responder wants to focus on. Probing involves asking different questions of different types, and reflecting is paraphrasing the speaker's message. Which response is appropriate depends on the speaker and the message the speaker is trying to convey, and what they are looking for from the person they are speaking with. Sometimes what the person is looking for is advice or instruction, and sometimes that's not what they're looking for. Each of the characteristics of supportive communication on its own can help to minimize defensiveness and disconfirmation, but effectiveness is maximized when you can use all of them in combination. I think I have said this in another video, but I like teaching this class every semester because I am constantly reminded of the things I should do and the things I can do better. I think it helps me to be a better professor and a better person. I try to be supportive in all my communications, but I'm not always successful. I have tried to learn to take a step back and view the situation as an outsider, and I find that helps along with waiting to respond unless immediate action is necessary. Here are some additional techniques to improve supportive communication skills. First, find your baseline level of skill by taking a skills inventory to see which aspect of supportive communication you should focus on first. Perhaps you are good at maintaining a problem-oriented discussion, but have difficulty using owned statements. Knowing which characteristic to focus on first will help you make a plan on improving overall and make progress more quickly. In addition to the skills inventory, you can also ask others about your supportive communication skills. It is possible that while you think your supportive communication skills are strong, that others disagree. This is often the case when men and women seek to communicate with one another because men and women tend to have different communication styles. If both worked at increasing their supportive communication skills, then misunderstandings and conflicts could be reduced. The difference in communication styles between men and women is beyond the purview of this lecture, but I have included several links to articles on the topic in the additional resources section of this video. Next, difficult conversations are difficult due to the topics involved, our natural inclination to avoid conflict, and the fact that most of us tend to have far more positive conversations than negative ones. Practice having difficult conversations with someone you know will give you useful feedback about your performance. Have them play the part of the person who needs corrected. The idea is to practice so that you're prepared and so that the actions and language you use will become more familiar and thus less discomforting. Related to the idea of the role play is planning out your next difficult conversation in advance with time to reflect on the plan before implementing it. Think about the possible reactions you might get and how to recognize a signal that you are not being supportive. Remember, the point of supportive communication is not to become best friends. You can't cut out the hard stuff. but to be able to have an honest conversation with someone whose actions need to be changed and to do so without damaging the relationship. After the conversation, review what and how you communicated and analyze the response you received from the other person. How can you tell if they understood what was necessary and that the relationship was not damaged by the interaction? And lastly, supportive communication works best when two people who are skilled at it. The next time someone has a difficult conversation with you because they want you to change your behavior, remember that unless the person is really high on disagreeableness, they aren't enjoying the conversation any more than you are, and responding with supportive communication skills will help you both out. And now, some questions for self-reflection. How often do you put away your phone and focus completely on the other person in a conversation? What does it signal if you do not look at the other person during the conversation? When was the last time you asked someone to change behavior? How did you ask and how did they respond? When was the last time someone asked you to change a behavior? How did they ask and how did you respond? Which characteristic of supportive communication do you find the most difficult? Who has the most responsibility in making sure that the communication is mutually supportive? How might an individual's other skills, like emotional intelligence and cultural competence, as well as their personality, influence their communication skills? That concludes this video on supportive communication. I hope you found the information useful and interesting. If you have any questions about this topic, please post them to the Student Questions discussion board in Blackboard. Chances are, if you have a question, someone else has that question too. If you are intellectually curious and would like to learn more, please stay tuned for the sources and additional resources list for this video. Thanks for watching.